This is Marna Weston for the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program at the St. Johns County Convention Center, speaking with Miss Rafaela Brown. And thank you very much for agreeing to talk with us today.
You're welcome.
Would you please state and spell your full name from birth?
Rafaela Brown. Rafaela Lozano Brown. And Rafaela Lozano Brown.
Thank you. And when and where were you born?
I was born in Fort Stockton, Texas in 1948.
Now, as a person that is maybe a little more familiar with Texas than me, could you describe where in Texas Fort Stockton is?
In the desert. Actually, it's like 150 miles from Del Rio, Texas, which is a border town. And it's in Pecos County.
Pecos County. Thank you. Who were your mother and father?
My father was Tomas Lozano, and my mother was Alice Faye.
And do you recall their birthdays?
My mother's birthday is July 31st, or the last day of July, 16.
And your dad?
I'm not sure.
That's right.
I don't remember that.
Do you know where they originally came from?
My mother came from Nacimiento, Coahuila in Mexico, and my dad was born in Dryden, Texas, which is 55 miles before you get to Sanderson, going through Del Rio.
How did your family come to Fort Stockton, where you were born?
My mother and father worked there. My dad did a lot of sheep shearing, and my mother was a cook.
Sheep shearing, I guess that sounds kind of like ranching. Was he associated with a ranch, or what is sheep shearing?
Well, there are people that go out during the season when they shear sheep, and that's all they do. And once they're finished, then they go back to town.
And your mother's job, did she work for a family, or did she work for a restaurant?
No, she cooked with the sheep. She cooked for the sheep. The guys that shave the sheep. She did the cooking.
Do you know how they began to do that? What put them into that line of work?
That's pretty much what's around there. If you don't work for the railroad or you don't work on a ranch, then that's what you do.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
I have had two brothers, and I have one sister.
Could you state the names of your brothers and sisters from oldest to youngest? And then you were talking to me before, so I know that two of them now have passed on, but if you could share that as well, please.
My sister, which is the oldest, her name is Carmen Hidalgo. She's, I believe, 75. And my next oldest brother was Luis Vasquez. And he died at the age of 60. And my youngest brother, which was the one in the middle, his name was Herbert Vasquez, and he died at the age of 56.
And you're the baby?
And I'm the baby.
Do you have children?
Yes.
Could you talk about your children, please?
I have 7 children. I have 2 teachers, 2 nurses. Actually, I have my youngest son played for Green Bay. He went to Green Bay. First couple of practices, he busted his knee up, so he wasn't able to play anymore. But they did take him out of college to go play for them. And they're all good kids.
What are their names from oldest to youngest?
Jonelle Brown, Tommy Brown, which is a girl. And then there's, my boys were named after my brothers. I have a Lewis and I have a Herbert. And then I have a Mary Brown and Michael Brown and Barbara Brown. And my youngest is handicapped, so she's at home with me.
And what is her name?
Her name is Barbara.
And their father's name?
Their father's name is Joseph Brown.
Okay. And how would you describe your life growing up with your brothers and sisters? Did you have chores? What happened around the home?
Actually, my youngest brother was 11 years older than I am, and they grew up in Mexico. They were born and raised in Mexico, and I was born over here in Texas, and I was raised over here. So I really didn't get to have a lot of interaction with my brothers and sister until they came over here, or when I would go visit.
So you were raised separately from each other?
Yes. When my mother came from Mexico, she left her 3 kids with my grandmother. And then because she was married before. And then she came over here, she met my father, married my father, and then I was born.
What encouraged this move from Mexico to the United States and United States and Mexico? What encouraged that?
Well, I think with her, it was taking care of the family. Things, even though they have a ranch in Mexico and they had cattle and they had goats, but money was still tight. And she had 3 mouths to feed, so because her husband and her separated, I don't know at what point in Mexico, and she ended up having to raise them by herself.
How would you describe yourself ethnically? We all have a history of culture and DNA and experiences, but how do you describe yourself? What is your ethnicity?
Well, I think it's a little confusing at this point because my father was Hispanic. Even though I was told, which I never met my grandmother on my father's side, and I'm named after my grandmother on my father's side, they said she was Indian. And then my mother is black, and she's also part Indian. So it's, I guess at this point I just consider myself Seminole, because I lived a long time with my mother. I lived actually like 30 years with my mother before she passed away. So everything that she knew, everything that she did, I'm it now. And I realize that since she's passed away, there's days when I do stuff and I say, okay, this is grandma, this is not me doing it. It's my mother.
Was your grandmother's nation different than your mother's nation?
No, because what her mother put in her was pretty much what great-great-grandma put in my grandmother, and it just trickled down through the women. And it's not been different. I still say yes, ma'am, no, sir, to anyone that I speak to. And I have a lot of people that tell me, well, you're older than I am. Why do you say, but that's just the way I was brought up. You were brought up to be polite. And that's all I know.
Well, being part of the Seminole Nation then, how is it that your family, friends, the people who you associated with, determine who is a Seminole? How do you determine who gets to make that claim?
Well, they go by families, ancestors, who your ancestors were, who your family was. At least that's how I learned who we were. It was through stories that my grandmother told, stories that my mother told about the family, and and who we were. And for a long time, when they said Seminole, I was like, oh, okay, so we're Seminoles. No big deal. We're just like everybody else. But then as I grew older, I realized that there was a little difference. We are a little different. Things that we're taught, even with religion. My mother was 94 when she passed away, but she passed away in June of last year. But for December, which was something that they always did, she fasts for every Friday for the month of December. She ate nothing all day. She drank nothing all day. And those are just things that were brought down through the...
I'm very sorry for the loss of your mother. That must be something you must think of her often now.
Oh, I do. I do.
Well, in discussing this ethnicity question, how do you determine the difference between what others outside of your nation describe as Black Seminoles or Red Seminoles or Seminoles, however they're described? How do you determine who is who and who is where? Or does that even make a difference in how you determine who you are within your nation?
To me, it doesn't make a difference. It's, if you're a Seminole, you're a Seminole. It's, we're really all Seminole descendants for the most part, but you are who you are,
How did you come to this conference on the Underground Railroad and the Gullah Geechee Nation people and the Seminole Nation people?
Well, I've talked to different people. I've met different people in Brackettville because we get together once a year in September for Seminole Day. And I've met people there. And like I said, I'm usually not the talker. My mother is the one that would get up and talk, and she would, but I still met people. And I met Shirley, the lady that wrote this book about my mother and her family and other families. And we just stayed in touch with her. And so she called me up and she asked me, she said, Effie, I know you don't like to talk and I know you don't, but will you go, will you go? And so I thought about it for a minute, and then I remembered my mother in the back, saying, you got to keep this going.
Mm-hmm. Did your family ever discuss when you were growing up stories of how ancestors escaped from slavery or found their way to freedom?
Yes, my grandmother used to tell us a little bit about her great-grandmother and how she would cry and she would tell them of all the nights that they walked, had no food. They only had like 2, 3, 4 horses, and they traveled a lot at night because they were afraid of being caught, and just how hard it was for them. Mm-hmm. And I also used to ask, well, how did you end up, because you're Black, because that's what I saw her as. I said, you're Black. How did you end up in Mexico? And she said, well, the Mexican government offered to take us in if we would help them with the Indians and stuff, and that's how we ended up here. Mm-hmm. Because I was always curious. I would go to Mexico, and my grandmother had English books. She could read a little bit in English. My mother couldn't read, but my grandmother could. And she had English books, and we were like, wow, but we're in Mexico. Everybody speaks Spanish here. Why does she have English books? But then I found out that, people would give her stuff, and she would keep it. And someone a long time ago went over there with some English books and gave them to her, and we would read them. She kept them, and we would read them, and she would tell us stories in English. Because I have half of my cousins are not Spanish speaking. I learned it at home because of my mother and father, and they both spoke Spanish, so I didn't have a problem with it.
Is your grandmother the oldest ancestor that you know of, or Are there people? Does your memory go back further in your family?
My grandmother is really the oldest one that I remember, and I only had one grandmother. By the time I was born, my grandmother on my father's side had already passed away, and the only one that I knew was my grandma that lived in Mexico.
Do you have any knowledge of your dad's mother and father, what their names were?
No, not really. My grandmother I know because they always told me that I hated my name when I was coming up, because nobody could spell it right, nobody could pronounce it right. But I was always told, well, but that was your grandmother's name. And actually my grandmother's buried in Sanderson, Texas. And when I go visit, because my father's buried there also, I now feel good when I go and I see my name on her gravestone. But I really don't know anything about my grandparents on my father's side.
The story that your grandmother told your mother, or the crying and the many days of walking and only having, one or two horses, where were they coming from that led them through Texas down to Mexico where they got the land? Where did they originate?
I don't know if she got a little confused or what, but she would tell us that they came from Florida. But then later on I found out that it was something like they went to Oklahoma and then they migrated into Mexico. I don't, because actually her grandmother was like 15 maybe when they traveled. But but she kept some of the stories and she remembered some of the stories. And of course, my grandmother, when she passed away, she was 103. So her memory sometimes would go and sometimes, she'd be right on it. But so a lot of it has been a little confusing. Some of it has been a little confusing. And I've been trying to put it together.
Do you recall any of the places in Florida that she may have mentioned? Because I'm just thinking it might be possible they went from Florida to Oklahoma, but I don't know either. But did she mention any specific places?
No. It was always Florida, and but then she would throw in Kansas, so then that's why I kind of, maybe they did go to Oklahoma and then went to Texas.
How do you believe the theme of this conference on the Underground Railroad fits into the story of your family?
Well, because I've met a lot of people in Del Rio that have came, and because we know a lot of people in Mexico, different people have came to visit on Seminole Day, and they say, well, my family, grandfather or somebody in their family ran away and band with the Black Seminoles and went to Mexico. And I've always thought that the two were related, the underground. And even though they tell us that we were never slaves, we never did this, but somewhere at some point we must have been. And I haven't quite gotten to that part yet.
I'd like to ask a little bit about your culture. I see you brought some books and you have some quilts and things to share. Before we talk about those, a quick question. What types of foods did you have when you grew up?
We ate a lot of Mexican food because, of course, we were raised around. Del Rio is just like almost being in Mexico. But there was one thing that always stood out at Christmas time, which was tetapun, which is a bread made out of sweet potatoes only. And there was also sufki, and that was made out of corn, but nobody else cooked it. We knew that the only place we would get that was when we went to go visit Grandma, and after Grandma passed away, then my mother would make it.
Well, I'd like to know if you'd like to share some of the items that you brought
Well, yes, these are quilts that are quilt pieces that my mother started, and it's amazing because I was looking at some of the quilt patterns down there, and they're really a lot similar to the ones that they did. And I don't know where they come about with the scraps, but I know that my grandmother and mother, what they would do is, if a dress was too old to wear, then they would cut it up into pieces and make quilts out of. And I really, these are not finished, but I do plan to finish these and keep them, because these were dear to my mother.
So how old would you say these quilts and the pieces that put them together are? This
one is probably about, I want to say 30 years old, maybe even a little bit older than that. And then this one here could be about 15, no, about 20, 25. And because what she would do is, like on her good days, she would sit and she would pick a day and she would just cut pieces. She would just cut the little pieces, and then she would sew until she finished that up, and then she would sit down and cut again. But like I said, a lot of it is just from dresses and things that she had, that because they didn't throw anything away. They, I guess, from going through hard times, they learned to not throw anything away. I was telling one of my cousins downstairs today that when my mother passed away, I went in my kitchen and there's like this cabinet door that wouldn't close. And I'm like, why won't it close? Well, my mother saved jars, all types of little jars. She would never throw away anything. And of course, I'm one of those Tupperware persons that I have all kind of, but she never used them. Everything that she would put away, she would find a little jar with a top and put it in there. And so they just didn't throw things away. And that's what this is. A lot of this is dresses, shirts, skirts, whatever she came across that couldn't be worn anymore. They had a tear, but the rest of it was still good. She'd cut it up to make a quilt.
What do you think about when you hold that quilt and you look at it?
My mother.
And you are a quilter now yourself.
I'm going to be.
And you will pass that down as well?
Oh, yes.
How long have you been thinking about quilting like this?
Since she passed away. She used to try to get me to sit down and do this, and I'm always like, okay, I'll learn tomorrow. Okay, I'll do it later. You know. But now, it's important.
Are there other crafts or traditions of your people that you also have knowledge of that you plan on sharing?
Oh, they know how to knit. They know how to crochet. My sister does beautiful work as far as crocheting. Of course, she lived in Mexico for a long time. And you have to understand that in Mexico, once everything was done, the kids were taken care of, the kids were fed, the kids were put in bed, then there was not very much else left for you to do. Of course, with me, my day is full. I teach from 7:30 to 3:30, and by the time I get home and do all the things that I have to do, it's time to go to bed to get up the next morning. So I want to say that I don't have the time, but I'm going to make the time because it's important.
Now, underneath that quilt, you have a book and a notebook. Are there some things that you'd like to share
well,
in the
actually,
notebook as
this
well?
is the book that Shirley wrote with my mother.
Could you hold that up one more time? Just, let's say, for Dreaming with the Ancestors, Black Seminole Women in Texas and Mexico.
And this is a picture of my mother in Mexico. Actually, after my grandmother passed away, like 3 months after my grandmother passed away, the house caught on fire and burned with everything in it. And this was what was left of the house. And this is actually her book. I've been after Shirley because she gave that book to my mother. She brought it to my mother right before she passed away, and she signed it. And I'm like, I don't want to use it. And when I was coming, I was reading it, but I was really skeptical about folding the leaves, you know, so the pages. I didn't want to do that. So she's going to get me another book.
Did she write an inscription, or she just signed it?
She just signed it.
Okay.
No. To Alice Faye, my friend and traveling companion. Love, Shirley. Her and Shirley have spent like 16 years together, back and forth. Mm-hmm. And she loved Shirley. Shirley was like part of the family.
Mm-hmm. Would you hold it open just so we can get a picture of the inscription, please? And then the picture as well, but just let it sit for a second. Okay, thank you. And you were going to show a picture on the back of the jacket?
Oh, you want to see? That's Shirley and my mother together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Beautiful lady.
And then her and Shirley actually did this one also.
Ah, okay.
This one they did before, and this is more like, actually both of these books are in Del Rio. They're in the school library, both of them. They put both of them. And this is the first one that her and Shirley did together.
There's some writing on the left page.
Well, this is just of how many children she had. My mother had 4 children. She had 25 grandchildren. She had 49 great-grandchildren. And she had 8 great-great-grandchildren.
I knew that was an important piece of paper.
We did this for the church actually last year. They wanted to recognize her in church, and we had to put that together. And this is my mother, actually at the cemetery in Metzger with a cousin of ours, and she's deceased also. Her name was Gertrude Vasquez.
Gertrude Vasquez. And is that particular grave, is that a family relative?
Her mother and my grandmother are buried side by side. And that's who that is. And then this is another one. Her and Gertrude were real close. So they did a lot of things together. Mm-hmm. And this is the house, and this is part of one of the houses in Metzger. Okay. This is the one that burnt down, and then this is the one that my mother and them she put together while they were building another one. There's one behind this now that's intact. But this is where she lived for a while until they could get the other one built. Mm-hmm. And then this is her speaking in bracket at the Seminole Cemetery.
Mm-hmm. So how did the Seminole Cemetery come about, and your mother become, was she speaking on an occasion for the cemetery, or?
Yes, well, in Bracketville, we have a lot of cousins, uncles, all her aunts and uncles on my grandfather's side are buried in Brackett. So there's really like a lot of family that's buried there. Cousins, Grandma Rose is buried there also, her 2 sons, and I think she has 2 daughters that are buried there also. So that's one of the things that's important to us is the cemetery.
Mm-hmm. What was the occasion that your mother was speaking at?
Seminole Day,
Seminole Day.
which is every year the third weekend in September.
Mm-hmm. Are there other special days that your family celebrates culturally as holidays?
Juneteenth and my mother's birthday. Her family, we all get together July, the last weekend in July for her birthday.
And any other days maybe that coincide, besides Christmas and...
No, that's it. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, both of these are my mother, and this is my grandmother, Nellie Faye. And her great-grandmother was Rose Kelly. And then I think I have, well, this is Grandma Rose right here, Rose Faye. But I have a big one there. I have this one. This one is of her, Rose Faye. That was my grandfather's mother.
Now, you've put this book together with these pictures. How much time did it take to put these materials together? Were they just sitting somewhere in one place, or did you have to, hunt around, or what type of work is represented here to see this together?
Well, collection. Mm-hmm. This is one book of like 5 books that I have at home. And again, this is Mexico. This is over in Mexico out at the ranch. This one also was done in Mexico.
Have you become sort of the family historian?
I'm going to be. I'm going to be. And then again, here's my grandmother. And Miss Gatron. That's my grandmother. And that's Miss Gatron. And that's taken in Mexico. Mm-hmm. And the way you see my grandmother dress here, this is the way she dressed every Christmas, because we sat up all night at church. And they would pray and sing, and then they would eat together. Everybody would cook something, and they would eat together. But this is pretty much what she wore when she went to church. Mm-hmm. And then this is some of my family and my brother. This is my brother right here, Herbert, the youngest boy. And these are his kids, well, his daughter and her husband. And I believe that the rest of them are mine.
So what is the connection that you have with your brothers and sisters' children? Are you all still very close?
Very close, very close. We plan to, we always get together. As a matter of fact, I just saw one of my nephews like 2 days before I came up here. Mm-hmm. They stay in touch. Well, because both brothers and their wives are deceased. So I'm the only that they have left.
You're the matriarch now, yes. the mother.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And did they all describe themselves as you do at Seminole?
Pretty much, yes. It's taken like, I guess, 10 years. I've started in on them, okay? And I have to like remind them, you got to pay your dues. There used to be a time when I used to pay their dues for them. Mm-hmm. Now it's like, no, you need to pay your dues. They come down for Seminole Day or they come down for Juneteenth. They love to go to Brackett.
Mm-hmm. Could you explain this concept of the dues? What are these dues?
Well, they're yearly dues that we pay to keep the upkeep on the cemetery. Mm-hmm. Because it takes money to cut grass and it takes money to keep it clean. We have to pay a water bill out there, so the whole family is expected to pitch in a little bit. Well, everybody is considered a Seminole, okay, because everybody has family that's buried out there.
Okay, so this is through the nation. This is
right,
an organized.
Right,
okay,
right.
Pay your dues. Is there a school anywhere on site?
There is a schoolhouse in Brackett, but
Oh, that's okay. That happens.
I don't.
You have Mexican music.
My kids put that on there. Here, let me. Maybe it'll go off. Yeah. I don't know very much about the schoolhouse in Bracketville because I didn't go to school there. I went to school in Sanderson, and then for a part of when I was coming up, I guess I want to say first grade through fourth grade, I went to school in Muleshoe, Texas, because my parents went to West Texas to work out there, and that's where I went to school at.
What are your earliest memories of school?
Del Rio, Little Black School by the river, well, by a creek. Actually, it's called San Felipe Creek. Actually, I was too young to go to school yet, but my brother, when he came from Mexico, went to school there for a bit, and they used to allow me to go to school with him. So he would put me on his bike, on his handlebars, and take me with him in the morning and bring me back in the afternoon.
So this was a segregated school?
Not that one.
Okay.
It was just a little bitty black school. Mm-hmm. They had one teacher that taught everybody.
Do you remember the teacher's name?
Miss Thompson.
And you called her very quickly. Why is it that you remembered her so quickly?
Because she was really strict. If you didn't pay attention, even though I wasn't going to school, I remember one time they talked me into pulling this little girl's hair, and I pulled her hair, and she sent them down to the creek to get a switch to spank me with. So I guess that's why I never forgot her.
But was that the only time? Just that once?
Just that once, yeah. But that was enough. You know, with the elders, I think one time for most of us was enough. And the way we were brought up was that it wasn't just mommy and dad that could spank you. If you act up, if you did something that wasn't right, anybody could spank you. So, you know, I tried to stay away from those. I got enough from my mother. And this again is in Mexico, and this is where they're both.
Would you mind lifting that just to point it so the camera can see? Who is the little girl in the picture?
The little girl, I believe, is one of her granddaughters.
Where did you go to high school?
Where did I go to high school? Actually, I went to high school like 3 months of the ninth grade, 10th grade. And then I quit school, got married. But then after my husband and I broke up, then I went back to Del Rio and I got my GED.
Was that something that you had committed to doing?
I had to get a job. I had to support my kids. You know, my kids for many years now, because I've been single for a long time. Again, I can't even tell you how many years. I had to support my kids. And through learning from my mother and everybody else in the family is that you got out and worked for what you needed to have. You know, there was no such thing as, okay, well, we're going to go get on welfare, or we're going to go ask for this, or we're going to go ask for that. You did whatever it was that you had to do to take care of the family. So I've washed dishes, I've cleaned house, not my favorite, neither one of them. I don't like washing dishes either. And I've worked as a waitress. I've done different things. And then I went to Kerrville. I got my CNA in Kerrville. thought about going to nursing school and then chickened out. Said, no, I couldn't do that. And then I went back and they asked me, well, do you want to go to school and be a teacher? And I'm like, I don't think so, because it was dealing with little kids. And then I thought about it for a couple of years, and I said, okay,
So
maybe that's what I need to do.
how long have you been a teacher?
I've been a teacher 11 years.
And what is it about teaching now that you've done it for 11 years that keeps you doing it?
The children, and actually being able to help teach children what's important in life. We have parents now, and when I say that, I talk even about my children, that we're not raising our children to be who they need to be. Children now everything is machine, why does my child need to learn to add when the calculator can do it for? And it's like, no, we need to learn these things. And I have grandchildren that if they talk to you, they will not say, yes, ma'am, no, sir, yes, sir. It's like that's taking something away from them. And what I've tried to teach them, that respect comes when nothing else works. And I guess that's really what keeps me going. Because we have these parents now that they're babies. They're babies raising babies, and they have no clue what they're doing. I didn't either, but I had a lot of help. My grandmother was there, and my mother was there. So, I'm not saying that I knew everything that I needed to know as far as parenting, but they helped a lot. And all my kids, even though they're in their 40s, you talk to them and it's yes, sir, no, sir. And by being a single mother also, my kids are not bad kids. I don't have any drunks. I don't have any, that do things that they shouldn't be doing. They were taught well by their grandmother and my mother and myself.
What will it mean for your children and their children being Seminoles as the century rolls on, and as 50 years, 100 years, 150 years from now? What do you think is out there for them?
I think there's a lot out there for them. Just not even being a Seminole, just being a person. If you're a good person, there's a lot out there for you. Mm-hmm. And if you learn that nobody puts anything in your lap and says, here, this is for you. You have to work for it. Mm-hmm. And as long as they learn to do that, I think they will be okay, and they should be proud Seminoles. Mm-hmm.
But is it your hope that the traditions that you treasure, that your mother treasured, her mother treasured, will be passed on, and those will continue for them as Seminoles?
I hope so, and I think they will, because all of my children love their grandmother, and they spent. Now the rest of the family didn't spend a lot of time, except for my sister, because she was married in Mexico and her kids were born in Mexico. But the rest of them, my two brothers, once they came over here, they never went back. They never took their children. So they haven't learned any of that. My kids, just like every summer, soon school's out, and they'll tell you now, the day school was out, we'd be looking forward to school being out. So if grandma wasn't there that day, we'd be like, ah. But guess what? She'd be there the next day. Come on, kids, let's go. And, I think they will.
I'd like to talk about some of the specific changes that have taken place, say over the last 50 years. One of them has to be, medicine and technology. When you were growing up, did your family use a lot of, home remedies and things like that, or did you actually go? People got sick, they went to the doctor.
Well, 50 years, no, there's not been a lot. There was not a lot of changes up until last year, because my mother still didn't believe in doctors, and actually, up until last year, my yard consists of nothing but this is good for your stomach, this is good for your headache, this is good for your back, this is good for your kidneys.
Mm-hmm. What are the names of some of those things?
Well, like corn silk, they made tea out of that for your kidneys. If your kidneys weren't, your back was, I think, the bark off the pecan tree. And I used to laugh because she'd always have me on the side of the road. No, stop. There's see that bush right there? We need that because we don't have that at home. And I'd be like, they're gonna put us in jail for stopping out here. But this was the kind of medicine that she believed in, mm-hmm. And some of it, believe it or not, worked.
Did you have many illnesses, colds and things in your family, or were they prevented by these home remedies? Or natural cures, pardon me.
Not a lot. I'm 63. I take no medication. The only real illness that I have is allergies. I have an allergy problem, but other than that.
There's nothing in the Seminole medicine cabinet for that?
Well, no, not really. Not really, but I don't take any medication for it either. I just,
And you're passing on these traditional, natural things that have been taught to you?
Yes. They always call me, Mom, when the kids are sick, what do I do? What do I give them? Because I've already given them what the doctor said and it's not working. And I'm like, okay, well, try this, and that's pretty much how we, I guess, would say roll. Some of the things and that she taught me a lot. Like I said, my mother was one of those ladies that knew a lot, taught me a lot, and I should have learned a lot more than I did.
Mm-hmm. Rafaela Brown, on behalf of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, I'd like to thank you for taking this time to talk about your family and your culture and your history. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you.
I'd like to close the interview just by offering you the opportunity to say anything you would like to, any comments or final thoughts, and when you have concluded those, that'll be the end of the interview.
No, I don't think I really have anything to say other than, family is important. We need to keep family and God in the picture all the time. Those are the two most important things in anyone that could be in anyone's life.